It started on a Wednesday night. I was standing in my kitchen, the overhead light casting a warm glow on the countertop where ripe plantains waited like silent witnesses. I slid a tray of thinly sliced fruit into a pan of hot oil, relishing the rhythmic hiss as each piece met the heat. The familiar aroma of caramelizing sweetness wrapped around me like a comforting blanket, and for a moment I closed my eyes and allowed myself to breathe. Evening routines had a way of smoothing out the rough edges of my day. That's when Celeste walked in. I heard her heels clicking on the tile before I saw her, the sound sharp and deliberate, slicing through the gentle symphony of sizzling oil. I turned, spatula in hand, and froze. She was wearing that expression, the one she reserved for moments she wanted to reframe as sober revelations, even when they felt like gut punches. Her brows were knitted together, lips pressed into a line that said clarity but carried the weight of something much heavier. I held my breath. The heat from the pan rushed up my arm. I turned back to the stove and nudged a plantain slice with the spatula to keep the illusion of calm. "Honey, dinner's almost ready," I said, my voice steady even though my pulse kicked up a notch. I didn't ask what was wrong. Sometimes questions were too eager, too intrusive. She stepped forward, folding her arms over her chest. Her eyes didn't waver from mine. "Let's pretend we broke up for a week, just to see how we feel." The spatula clattered against the pan. A drop of oil leapt onto the counter, steaming where it hit. I swallowed. My mouth went dry, as though every familiar thing in the room was suddenly alien. Plantains, pan, the scent of home. It all belonged to a life I was suddenly watching from the outside. "You're serious?" I managed, measuring my words so they wouldn't betray the swirl of questions in my mind. She nodded once, deliberately. Just a reset. A little space. It worked for my friend Jolene and her husband. Jolene's name tasted like irony in my mouth. I remembered how that marriage splintered soon after her own reset, though Celeste never seemed to notice. I didn't argue. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of it expand in my lungs before I let it go. "If that's what you want," I said. I thought of every promise we had made, each whispered vow, and every late-night conversation stitched into us. I wondered if our foundation was built on sand. In that moment, I realized how worn I was, in body, in spirit. We'd grown comfortable with friction, sparking arguments over dirty dishes or thermostat settings when what we really needed was understanding. And yet here she stood, treating our future like an experiment. She hesitated, as though expecting me to protest, to pull her back into the orbit we'd created together. When I didn't, her shoulders sagged imperceptibly. I flipped another plantain, crisping its edge to a perfect golden brown. Time slowed. I heard the faint tick of the wall clock, felt the porcelain of the kitchen counter cool beneath my fingertips. Everything in me wanted to shout, to cry out that love wasn't a science project. But the stillness between us was too loud, and I kept my silence. 7 days, she said, voice low. She outlined the rules with the precision of a contract negotiator, mapping out boundaries I hadn't known we needed but sensed we feared. I nodded. 7 days. The words were both endless and fleeting. I wondered how many mornings we would wake in the same house without speaking, how many nights I would stare at an empty pillow beside mine. She crossed her arms and studied the pan as if it held the answer to some complex equation. "I'll stay with Jolene," she said finally. "She's expecting me tonight." The words landed between us like a verdict. I set the spatula down and let the pan drain into the sink, grateful for the distraction of water filling with oil. When I turned back to her, she was watching me, her face composed but her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name. I walked over and picked up a clean dish towel. My hands folded it in neat thirds. I placed it on the counter, each fold an attempt at ordinary order in the face of chaos. My heart pounded a quiet rhythm against my ribs, and I felt strangely hollow. Words hovered on my tongue that I couldn't catch. All I could do was look at her and wait. She exhaled softly and reached for her bag by the door. The leather held the shape of her week's clothes, but I barely saw it. I was too focused on her expression, calm but fractured. I knew this was more than an experiment. It was a choice, and yet I still longed to believe that she could be right, somehow. She slung the bag over her shoulder, turned to face me, and for a heartbeat her eyes softened. "This could help us," she whispered. "Just trust me." I met her gaze. Trust. The word felt brittle on my tongue, but I gathered the last bit of composure I could muster and answered, "Okay." She looked almost disappointed. "Day 1. Peace arrived like an unexpected gift, wrapped in quiet and stillness. I woke up to empty sheets beside me, the pillow cool and untouched by body heat. My eyes opened to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the curtains, and I lay there for a moment, letting the absence of her breathing settle around me. It was unsettling, like a concert hall after the final note has faded, beautiful in its silence, but charged with an unfamiliar emptiness. I slipped out of bed slowly, careful not to disturb the air, and padded across the carpet toward the kitchen. The apartment felt larger than before, every corner suddenly conspicuous in its solitude. I flipped on the light and found the coffee maker waiting, its reservoir empty. Breathing in, I measured out grounds and water, the familiar sounds of brewing filling the space. As the rich aroma rose in curling tendrils, I realized I hadn't moved this freely through our home in years. When the coffee was ready, I poured a mug and carried it to the living room. I expected echoes of her presence, an abandoned book, a pair of slippers, but found only the faint imprint of morning shadows on the walls. I sank into the armchair by the window, cradling the mug in my hands, and exhaled slowly, tasting the bittersweet warmth. No passive-aggressive notes about dishes left in the sink. No sighs when I reclaimed a pillow she deemed hers alone. Just the simple, unadulterated peace of a house unshared. I took a sip of coffee and allowed myself to feel the novelty of it, the sensation of uninterrupted thought. For once, my mind didn't skip ahead to the next minor irritation or replay last night's tense exchange. Instead, I lingered in the present, watching swaying branches outside, listening to distant traffic hum, and marveling that something as small as quiet could feel revolutionary. Later, I wandered through our bedroom. Her side was neatly made, her clothes already gone. I felt a pang, not the raw ache of heartbreak, but a gentle tug of something else, relief. I ran my fingers over the high thread count sheets, remembering how, just hours before, those same sheets had suffocated me with tension and unspoken grievances. Today, they cradled me without judgment. I dressed in my usual workout clothes, pulled on sneakers, and headed out for a morning run. The streets were waking up, joggers and dog walkers greeting the dawn with rhythmic strides and soft hellos. I matched their pace, noticing how my legs moved in a steady, unhurried rhythm. My lungs drew in crisp air, and each exhale carried away a little more of the tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. For the first time in ages, my own thoughts were my only company, and that felt like a luxury. Returning home, sweat cooling on my skin, I showered and dressed for work, folding my clothes with deliberate care. No one else's laundry awaited my critique. No one else's shirts cluttered the hamper. I packed my bag quickly, enjoying the efficiency of a routine untempered by dispute. At my desk, emails awaited attention, and I dove into work with a clarity I hadn't known in years. Projects moved faster, ideas flowed unimpeded by distractions of relational turbulence. Each completed task felt like a small victory, a testament to focus unfragmented by emotional undercurrents. I glanced at the clock and realized hours had passed with the kind of productivity that felt almost addictive. When lunchtime arrived, I prepared a simple salad and sat at the kitchen island, expecting the ache of loneliness to creep in. It didn't. Instead, I noticed flavors more vividly: the crisp bite of lettuce, the tang of vinaigrette, the satisfying crunch of toasted seeds. I ate slowly, savoring each mouthful without the backdrop of a disagreement or a careless remark. After lunch, I scrolled through messages and saw none from her. The rule was no calls, no texts, unless urgent. I felt pride in my adherence to that boundary. I poured myself another cup of coffee and settled into a chair by the window. Sunlight pooled on the floor, and I watched clouds drift lazily across a bright sky. There was no sense of obligation to explain or justify, no lingering worry about how my words might land. I was simply present with myself. By mid-afternoon, an unexpected calmness had settled into me. I realized how much of my life had been governed by her moods and mine in reaction, oscillating between tension and forced reconciliation. Today, that cycle was suspended. The freedom it brought was not euphoric or giddy. It was steady, like the firm ground beneath a tightrope walker after leaving the rope behind. In the early evening, I decided to walk to the neighborhood park. Trees lined the path, their leaves whispering overhead as a gentle breeze passed through. I spotted an empty bench and sat, taking in the scene. Children chasing one another, runners looping the track, couples strolling hand in hand. I felt neither envy nor bitterness. just a sense of belonging to the broader tapestry of life unfolding around me. When the sun dipped low in the sky, I walked back home, the air cooling against my skin, and reflected on the day. I thought about Celeste, where she was, how she was spending her first night apart from me in years. I wondered if she felt the strange mix of relief and uncertainty I'd experienced this morning. But even that thought arrived softly, without desperation. I acknowledged it, then turned my focus back to the cool dusk air, the quiet hum of city lights flickering on one by one. Back in the apartment, I brewed a cup of herbal tea and carried it to the couch. The pillows were neatly arranged. There was no debate over fluffing or rearranging them to suit someone else's preference. I leaned back, closed my eyes for a moment, and sighed deeply. I realized that I had slept through the night without waking to tension, and I had gone hours without feeling the familiar knot of resentment tighten in my chest. As I sipped my tea, I felt gratitude for that first day of peace, for the clarity it brought. It wasn't a fix or a cure, it was a window, a glimpse into what life could be without constant friction. Tomorrow, the real test of this separation would begin. Whether I could hold on to this equilibrium or whether the absence of her presence would reveal new challenges. But tonight, I allowed myself to rest in the stillness, to appreciate the rare gift of peace earned not through compromise or conversation, but through honest separation. I set the empty mug on the side table, turned off the lamp, and walked to the bedroom. I slid under the cool sheets, the bed welcoming me without question or expectation. As I drifted towards sleep, I carried with me the memory of a day unbroken by conflict, a day that reminded me how much I had given away in the name of compromise, and how much I had left to discover when I reclaimed my own space. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for one miraculous day, I had peace. And that was enough. By day 3, the routine of separation had settled around me like an old coat. Comfortable in its predictability, even as it accentuated the hollow where Celeste once belonged. My mornings began with the quiet hum of the coffee maker rather than the soft murmur of her sleepy voice. My bed remained undisturbed on one side, the sheets neatly tucked where she no longer kicked them off in restless dreams. Work felt sharper, more insistent. Deadlines and deliverables occupied my mind, leaving little room for longing. I slipped into a rhythm where every action felt deliberate, as if I were reacquainting myself with life one small choice at a time. That afternoon, I broke from routine for a simple lunch. I reheated leftovers in the microwave, then carried my plate to the balcony. The city stretched out below, a tapestry of concrete and motion, punctuated by the distant chatter of passers-by and faint car horns. I ate slowly, savoring each bite as though it were proof of my renewed autonomy. There were no interruptions, no casual remarks about my fork usage or the lack of seasoning. Instead, there was only the food, the air, and the sharp clarity I'd begun to crave. After lunch, I reached for my phone almost reflexively, then remembered the rule: no calls, no texts, unless urgent. I set the device face down and walked away, resisting the urge to seek news of her whereabouts. Loneliness stirred, but I reminded myself of the lesson in boundaries. If I truly wanted to discover how I felt, I needed to uphold the conditions we'd agreed upon. Later, while waiting for the elevator, I checked Instagram. My thumb hovered over the app icon before I unlocked my phone. Scrolling had been harmless, until it wasn't. There, in my feed, was a photo that landed like a brick in my chest. Celeste, curled into the chest of a man I didn't know, on a plush white couch. She wore a soft smile, eyes closed in what looked like contentment. His arm was draped around her waist, fingers splayed in an intimate hold. They fit together in the image, two puzzle pieces I hadn't realized were missing from my own life. The caption beneath the photo read, "Sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need." Beneath her smiling face, I saw a world I'd never been invited to join. Despite every pang of betrayal, my reaction was strangely muted. My heart didn't pound. It didn't ache. It simply froze, as though the image were a photograph of someone else's life. Cold clarity edged through me. She had called this arrangement a test, but this post revealed a pre-existing choice. She had already embarked on a new chapter, soft-launching her exit under the guise of experimentation. I didn't call her. I didn't send a flurry of messages demanding explanation. Instead, I stepped out of the elevator, locked my phone, and walked to my car. The engine's rumble beneath me felt like the first honest sound I'd heard all day. I navigated home in a blur, memories of plantains and coffee dissolving in the aftermath of that single image. Inside the apartment, I closed the door lightly behind me and leaned against it. I shut. The walls, once pillars of domestic intimacy, now felt like witnesses to something ending. I inhaled deeply, remembering the tips of her hair brushing my face, her laugh trailing down the hallway, the simple weight of her arm around my shoulder. Those memories flickered and then dimmed, replaced by a quiet resolve. She had shown me who she wanted. I would show her what I deserved. I moved with purpose. I dialed Ruben, my landlord, from the hallway. He answered on the second ring. His voice was warm, familiar, an anchor in my sudden drift. "Hey man," I said. "Quick question. If one spouse moves out voluntarily, can the remaining tenant modify the lease?" His reply was methodical. I couldn't evict her, but I could apply to have her removed from the lease. I thanked him and hung up, feeling the first spark of control since this all began. Next, I called Leah, the paralegal friend who had once helped me navigate a minor dispute with a neighbor. Her advice was clinical but necessary. Document everything and avoid emotional reactions. I described the Instagram post, her absence, and my intention to change the locks. She reminded me to photograph the bags of clothes by the door, save messages, and keep our interactions strictly factual. I made mental notes, gratitude warming my chest like the morning sun. I retrieved 2 large duffel bags from the closet, her jeans, sweaters, sneakers already sorted, and loaded them by the front door. Each item felt like a relic of a story I was choosing to close. With the bags in place, I fetched the spare keys and changed the front lock in 3 deft turns. Cold metal clicked into place, and I inhaled the metallic scent of finality. The old key no longer fit. The lock no longer invited her back in. I stepped away from the door and let the silence wash over me. The apartment felt empty, not because of her absence, but because I had removed her access. It belonged to me now, free from games disguised as tests. I dipped into the kitchen for a drink. Something smooth to mark the occasion and carried it to the couch. The cushions welcomed me without comment. I raised the glass and allowed myself a small toast to honesty and boundaries, to truth without theatrics. My phone buzzed before I could sip more than a few drops. I glanced at the screen. "Celeste, where are you?" "What the hell? We're just on a break." My chest tightened at her words, but I didn't respond. The silence between us answered more clearly than any message could. She had made her choice. I had enforced mine. That night, I lay in bed alone, the lock's click still echoing in my mind. The space beside me felt spacious rather than empty. I closed my eyes, tasting the residue of the day's revelations. I had resisted the impulse to confront her, to beg for clarity. Instead, I had moved with intentional calm, establishing a boundary she couldn't ignore. As sleep came, I carried the image of that Instagram post in my mind, but not as agony. It was a lesson. I had passed the real test by refusing to play along. She had tested our love. I tested mine by choosing self-respect over desperation. In the darkness, I felt lighter than I had in months. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but I had already learned what mattered: actions, not words. And I had chosen mine. I didn't call her. I didn't send a barrage of frantic texts demanding explanations or apologies. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the afternoon light slanted across the surface, and let the quiet between us speak for both of us. It was a deliberate silence, one I had cultivated through 2 days of absence, and it felt powerful, like an unspoken decree that I would no longer be swayed by words wrapped in excuses. I poured myself a glass of water and inhaled deeply, feeling the cool liquid steady my racing heart. Emotions churned beneath the surface: betrayal, anger, sorrow. But I refused to let them cloud my judgment. This was no time for drama. Actions, not words, would write the next chapter of our story. I stood and crossed the living room to my desk, where a stack of mail lay unattended. Among benign flyers and credit card offers, I found what I needed: the lease agreement I'd signed with Celeste 6 months earlier. I flipped through the pages, noting her signature alongside mine, and felt a surge of resolve. This document represented our shared commitment to a home built on trust, and she had broken that trust. If she wanted to play games, I would respond with legality and principle. I grabbed my phone and dialed Ruben, our landlord, and the only other person with a key to our apartment. His familiar voice greeted me on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Theo, what's up?" I cleared my throat. "Ruben, quick question. Celeste moved out voluntarily. No formal eviction notice or anything. Can I apply to have her removed from the lease? There was a brief pause, then his tone grew measured. If she moved out and didn't object to you handling the lease, yeah, you can request a modification. You can fill out the necessary paperwork. I'll back you up. But she has to sign off, or the court will look for her consent. Understood, I said, jotting down notes. I want to keep things clean and legal. No surprises. He chuckled, but I heard the seriousness underneath. I'll send you the forms tonight. Fill them out and return them, and I'll handle the rest. After thanking him, I hung up and sat back. The first step was in motion. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. Clarity was a bomb. Words had failed me, but the law would not. Next, I called Leah, the paralegal friend I'd confided in during happier times when we'd laughed over coffee about my budding career and her courtroom dramas. Her empathy was matched only by her pragmatism. She answered on the first ring, her voice warm but businesslike. Theo, you sounded urgent. Everything okay? I described what I'd seen on Instagram, Celeste's declaration of exactly what you need, and my plans to secure the lease. I spoke succinctly, leaving out rage and hurt. I needed her professional counsel, not her sympathy. Leah sighed softly. I'm sorry you're going through this. Document everything, screenshots of the post with timestamps, any messages she sends, the bags by the door. Keep emotions out of it. If you stay calm and factual, it strengthens your position. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. I thought so. I want to avoid drama. What about locks? If you're on the lease solo after the modification, you can change the locks. Until then, you risk a dispute if she claims she wasn't properly removed. We discussed timelines and paperwork, and she agreed to review everything before I submitted it. Hanging up, I felt the reassuring click of strategy snapping into place. With legal and personal preparations underway, I turned to the final, most tangible gesture, reclaiming my home. I retrieved 2 duffel bags from the closet and began filling them with Celeste's clothes. Jeans I'd hated folding, sweaters I'd admired in cooler months, shoes I'd always found too delicate for my rough and tumble life. Each item carried a memory, but I treated them like evidence, not relics. I moved methodically, one shirt at a time, one folded stack at a time. I paced myself, letting each movement ground me in purpose rather than pain. Carrying the bulging bags to the entryway, I placed them by the front door. The sight of her belongings in transit felt surreal, like photographing footprints in sand before the tide erased them. I didn't gloat, I simply observed. This was a necessary boundary, not vengeance. Next, I retrieved the spare key from its hiding spot behind a potted fern. My hands didn't tremble as I fitted into the lock. I turned slowly, half expecting an alarm or a voice to protest, but all that greeted me was the satisfying click of mechanism sliding into place. The world felt suspended for a moment, the apartment humming with the latent power of exclusion. The old key no longer worked. The door now recognized only me. I stepped back and surveyed the entryway. 2 heavy bags, a changed lock, a silent threshold marking my autonomy. No theatrics, no need for shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. Let her knock, let her message. The boundary was clear. I moved to the living room, sat on the edge of the couch, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My chest felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because I'd taken control, heavier because endings carry their own weight. I reached for my phone and bookmarked the screenshots Leah had told me to gather, then opened my notes app and began typing a list, forms to fill out, evidence to save, next steps for court filing. Structure was my refuge. An hour later, I brewed a pot of strong coffee. The rich aroma filled the apartment, grounding me in the steadiness of routine. I poured a mug and carried it to the balcony, leaning against the railing as the afternoon breeze stirred. Below, neighbors exchanged greetings. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground. Life continued, indifferent to the upheaval in my apartment. That indifference brought comfort, reminding me that my personal storm was contained within walls I now controlled. Before I returned inside, I paused to watch the sky shift from bright blue to soft gold. In that light, I felt a quiet pride. I hadn't lashed out or pleaded. I hadn't succumbed to despair. I had taken deliberate steps, each one grounded in self-respect. Back inside, I settled at my desk with Leah's checklist and Ruben's forms. Pen in hand, I began filling in my name and address, crossing out Celeste's details with a sense of finality that drove every stroke. When the paperwork was complete, I scanned the documents and sent them to Leah for review. Then, just to ensure everything was documented, I took photographs of the bags by the door, the lock turned firmly in place, and saved them with timestamps. By evening, the apartment felt unfamiliar and yet undeniably mine. I brewed myself a simple dinner, savoring the unbroken calm of eating in solitude. No uncomfortable silences, no hesitant sips or tentative check-ins, just me, a plate of pasta, and a sense of agency that tasted richer than any sauce. Later, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window and paused. In the glass, I saw someone changed by resolve, shoulders squared. I steadied. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt aligned with my own principles. Actions, not words, had carried me here. In the stillness of that moment, I realized that this was more than a reaction to betrayal. It was a reclaiming of self. I turned away from the reflection and walked toward the bedroom, the soft carpet welcoming each step. Under the dim glow of the bedside lamp, I set my mug on the nightstand and lay down. As I closed my eyes, the challenges ahead no longer loomed like dark clouds. They lined up like stepping stones. Each stone represented a deliberate choice, a measured action. Tomorrow would bring new tests, but I knew I would meet them with the same quiet determination. Tonight, I rested knowing that I had already passed the most important examination, the one of self-respect and integrity. Actions, not words, had shown me who I was, and who I would be from here on. The next morning, I woke to the gentle hum of my alarm and the soft glow of dawn creeping through the blinds. My body felt surprisingly rested, perhaps the most rest I'd had in months. And as I stretched beneath the crisp sheets, I reminded myself that today was day 5 of our break. I rose, swung my feet onto the floor, and padded into the kitchen, where the kettle hissed alive. Steam curled from the spout as I measured coffee grounds into the French press, and for a moment, I let the ritual center me. Celeste's empty side of the bed felt like a statement rather than an absence, a punctuation mark underscoring everything that had shifted between us. I didn't miss the half-empty pillow or the stray hairs in the sheets. Instead, I felt a sense of solidity, as though my life no longer depended on someone else's footsteps in the hallway. I poured myself a mug of dark, strong coffee and carried it to the living room, where sunlight spilled across the sofa. I perched at the edge, cradling the warmth in my hands and watching the city awaken through the window. My phone lay face down on the coffee table, a silent witness to the agreement we'd made. No calls, no texts, unless urgent. I resisted the urge to pick it up and scroll for news of her whereabouts. I had become the architect of my own boundaries, and I intended to honor them. Instead, I leaned back and let the quiet morning fill me, grounding myself in the knowledge that I was, at last, in control of my own narrative. An hour later, my phone buzzed. I didn't flinch, but my heartbeat ticked up, betraying a flicker of anticipation I hadn't yet mastered. The screen lit, displaying her name in capital letters, Celeste. I pressed the power button to wake the screen fully and saw the message. "Where are you?" "What the hell? We're just on a break." I stared at the text, the words pulsing on the display like neon signs demanding attention. My thumb hovered over the reply field, mind racing through possible responses. Anger, fury, begging, explanation. But I didn't type. I remembered Leah's counsel, to document everything and avoid emotional reactions. This was exactly the kind of bait she would throw to derail me, to pull me back into the cycle of defensiveness and desperation. I refused to bite. I pressed the lock button, silencing the screen, and set the phone aside. The silence that followed felt like a victory. Without a return message, I reclaimed my composure. I poured the rest of my coffee into a travel mug, cupped it in my hand, and walked to the balcony. The city below moved in its usual chaotic ballet, delivery trucks rumbling, joggers weaving through morning traffic, birds darting between trees. Celeste's urgent tone dissolved into the ambient sounds, and I savored the clarity that came from not replying. By mid-morning, I found myself at the office before anyone else, which gave me a pocket of uninterrupted time to tackle the week's toughest projects. I moved through tasks with laser focus, drafting proposals, analyzing reports, and triaging emails. Each completed item felt like a small triumph, proof that my life had not unraveled in her silence. If anything, it felt steadier, more predictable. In her absence, I discovered an unexpected reservoir of productivity and calm. During lunch, I opted for a brisk walk rather than scrolling through social media. The crisp air invigorated me as I circled the neighborhood park, my footsteps echoing on the pavement. I replayed her message in my mind, each, "Where are you?" and "What the hell?" and noted how the words fizzed with panic and confusion. She insisted we were just on a break, but her tone said something else. She was grasping, afraid, and perhaps realizing the gravity of what she'd set in motion. I felt neither pity nor triumph. I felt only resolve. Back at my desk, I poured a second cup of coffee and sprinted through a series of calls, each one a reminder that my world continued without her involvement. I coordinated with contractors for a minor renovation, scheduled a car service, and confirmed logistics for the weekend trip I had quietly booked to clear my head. Every plan, every arrangement, reinforced the fact that I was moving forward, not waiting for her permission. Later in the afternoon, my phone buzzed again. I glanced down. Another message from her. "Celeste, are you ignoring me?" I wiped my thumb across my lip, considering the impulse to fire back a sharp retort. Instead, I saved the screenshot and immediately forwarded it to Leah with a brief note. Day 5, received at 3:14 p.m. My actions remained deliberate, my responses measured. By involving Leah, I protected myself from impulsive reactions and ensured that every volley she sent would be documented, factual, and unemotional. The remaining hours of the workday passed in a blur of spreadsheets and phone calls. When the clock finally struck 6, I packed up, closed my laptop, and prepared to leave. I stepped out into the fading light, the sky painted in ribbons of pink and gold, and felt a swell of anticipation for the evening. She might have stirred unrest, but I refused to let her anxiety become mine. On the drive home, I stopped at the grocery store, loading my cart with the ingredients for a simple dinner: fresh fish, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of white wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. As I moved through the aisles, I noticed other couples shopping side by side. I felt a pang of something. Nostalgia, perhaps, but it passed quickly. I reminded myself that we had chosen this arrangement together, and any loneliness was a byproduct of her decision as much as my own. Back in the apartment, I unpacked groceries with careful efficiency, placing each item in its designated spot. I felt a sense of ownership that was new and invigorating. I turned on soft music, the gentle strains filling the space as I prepared dinner with mindful attention to each chop and stir. The aroma of lemon and herbs mingled in the air as the fish roasted, and I poured myself a glass of wine, savoring the first sip. It tasted of freedom and self-reliance, an elixir for the soul. As I ate, I revisited her messages, still unanswered. I didn't deride her desperation or mock her confusion. Instead, I observed her words with an analytical mind and a calm heart. She wanted to pull me back into the narrative she'd written, but I had a story of my own to tell. One of self-respect and intentional living. By the time I cleared my plate, darkness had settled outside, and city lights twinkled like distant stars. I rinsed dishes, dried them, and set them away without a second thought. Then I returned to the living room, poured the last of my wine into my glass, and curled onto the sofa with a book. The world she had spun, the one where pauses could become permanent breaks, had no power over me tonight. Late, I placed my phone on the coffee table, face down as always, and slid into bed. The mattress shifted beneath me, and I closed my eyes, feeling the steady rise and fall of my own breath. Tomorrow would bring more messages, more tests disguised as outreach, but I welcomed them. Each one was an opportunity to reaffirm my boundaries, to document her choices, and to live by my own. In the hush of the night, I found a quiet triumph. Her questions would no longer dictate my heart's rhythm. I had crafted my own cadence, and it sounded like peace. She returned 2 days later, her small frame rattling against the door as she pounded until my hand hurt from knocking. When I opened it, I saw the storm in her eyes, swollen lids, mascara tracks cutting black rivers across pale cheeks, lips quivering with a tremor that said more than her words ever could. Her hair was mussed, a few strands plastered to her forehead from frantic pacing, and her shoulders shook with sobs she could barely contain. I didn't mean any of it, she stammered, voice cracking like thin ice underfoot. It was just a test. I never slept with him, I swear. She reached toward me, fingers trembling, brushing my sleeve like a drowning person grasping for a lifeline. Kellen's just a friend. We were talking. That's all. I held the door open, but we both knew she couldn't come in. Behind me, the apartment felt secure, walls standing firm. I took a steady breath. I'd spent the past days cataloging her every move, texts, screenshots, timestamps, and I'd drawn my boundary. Nothing she said now could erase the truth I'd uncovered. "I don't doubt you saw him," I said quietly, voice measured. "But you didn't see us. You never wanted to see how we feel. You wanted to see if you could get away with it." Her shoulders slumped as though the weight of my words broke something inside her. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear away the realization. She began, throat working. "You're making it sound like I'm a monster." "I'm making it sound like you made choices," I corrected. "Choices that didn't include me. You proposed a week apart, then used it to explore someone else. That's not a test. That's an escape hatch." Her face collapsed into fresh tears. She turned away, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Why are you doing this? Why are you acting like you don't care?" I glanced at the duffel bag still lined by the door, her belongings packed and ready. The changed lock behind me felt like armor, each click of its mechanism a statement of self-preservation. I stepped aside so she could see those bags, her things waiting to be claimed by someone who understood boundaries. "It's because I do care," I said, the words soft but resolute. "I care enough not to play games. You want to reset?" I reset by walking away from someone who tore holes in our promises. Her back trembled as she fought to speak. "But can't we talk? Can't we fix this?" I studied her, searching for the woman I'd married, the one who once let her guard down so completely I can see the light in her eyes. Now that light was overcast with regret and fear. But regret without responsibility was hollow. "I fixed what needed fixing," I said, turning slightly to block her path. "By protecting myself." She swallowed hard, shoulders straightening with the realization that I wouldn't relent. "So this is it?" she whispered. "You're done?" I met her gaze head on. "I'm done with being the subject of your experiments." The words hung between us as she closed her eyes, a single tear escaping to trace her cheek. She looked so small in that moment. Frightened, exposed, but I felt no pull to rescue her. My empathy was tempered by self-respect. She took a hesitant step back. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I replied. "Just understand. I passed your so-called test by refusing to be the pawn." Her lips parted, then closed, as though she'd rehearsed 100 apologies and found them all inadequate. At last, she turned and picked at the hem of her shirt, the motion shy and tentative. She didn't reach for the handle. She didn't ask me to let her in. She just stood there in the threshold, a silhouette of regret. "I'm sorry, Theo," she murmured. The name sounded strange on my ears now, weightless without the intimacy it once carried. I gave her a small nod, both acknowledgement and release, then stepped aside so the door could close without a confrontation. She didn't hesitate this time. The door swung shut on a chapter of our lives we would never reopen together. I leaned against it, listening to the retreating click of her footsteps on the hallway floor. Behind me, the apartment settled into its familiar quiet. I closed my eyes and felt the lock's cold metal under my fingers, a solid promise that I had chosen myself. Alone again, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The room felt free, buoyed by the knowledge that I had passed the test of my own worth. And in the hush that followed her breakdown, I discovered something new. The strength to rebuild. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, I felt a tension lift from my shoulders, as though the walls themselves were relieved to have my full attention once more. I stood in the silent hallway for a heartbeat before turning and stepping back into the apartment, where every item felt charged with meaning. The duffel bags by the door, the changed lock, the empty spaces on the shelves all bore witness to choices made. Choices I refused to undo. I didn't have to wait long. She returned minutes later, refusing to be silenced by steel and concrete. First came the tears, those raw, jagged droplets that tracked down her cheeks with an almost desperate urgency. Her sobs rattled through my chest when she confronted me in the living room, voice thick with recrimination. "We're married, Theo. You can't just lock me out because I tried to shake things up." Her words hit me like stones, heavy and punishing. I watched her tremble, arms crossed to hold together the pieces of her composure. Her mascara traced dark lines down her face, and I could see how grief and anger warred in her eyes. But I didn't soften. Empathy might have been my impulse once, but now I remembered that empathy without boundaries was what brought me here. I squared my shoulders and met her gaze. "You didn't shake things up," I said, voice calm but firm. "You blew them up. You lied. You cuddled up with another man 3 days in. You didn't want to see how we feel. You wanted to see if you could get away with it. Each word landed with deliberate care, the click of intention echoing through the room. She flinched as though struck, and for a moment I feared I'd gone too far. But I held my ground. Her face contorted in rage, as though she fought to contain a storm within. You don't get it, she spat, voice cracking. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, trembling with indignation. You think you're so perfect, so above reproach, but you don't know anything about what I needed. I needed space. I needed clarity. Clarity? I interrupted softly, the single word a scalpel. Clarity doesn't look like betrayal. It doesn't look like public declarations and secret rendezvous. It looks like talking. It looks like honesty. Not this charade you called a test. Her chest heaved. She took a stumbling step forward, hair swinging across her face. You think you're better than me? You think I wanted any of this? Her voice twisted with desperation, and I saw the vulnerability beneath the fury, fear that she had shattered something she couldn't repair. I exhaled, letting the energy drain from my body. I wanted to reach out, to comfort those tears, to tell her I understood her pain. But I had reached that turning point where compassion without reciprocal respect only hurt me more. I do know fear, I said gently. Fear of being unwanted. Fear of being replaced. But I learned something this week. I'm worth more than being someone's experiment. I'm worth honesty, even if it hurts. She blinked, confusion flickering across her features. She opened her mouth as though to argue, then closed it, as though realizing her words offered no refuge. The weight of my truth settled between us, heavy enough to silence her rant. In that hush, I saw her armor crack, glimpsed the regret she refused to fully acknowledge. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered finally, the words fragile. I could feel the shift in her posture, the way her fists unclenched, shoulders slumping as if admitting defeat. It was the first step towards something neither of us could yet name. I thought this would help us. It didn't, I said, stepping aside so she could see the bags by the door, as if they were footprints marking the boundaries I had drawn. I'm not here to play games, Celeste. If you want to be in my life, you have to respect my boundaries and treat me as an equal partner, not a pawn. Her lower lip trembled, and she swallowed hard. She took a tentative step forward, then halted, uncertainty warring with resolve. I remained still, offering no invitation, only space for her to choose. She exhaled, a single, trembling breath, and turned away. As the door closed behind her again, sealing the space between us, I felt a profound finality. The chapter we shared had ended. In its place lay the promise of something new, either a rebuilt partnership founded on genuine respect, or two separate lives shaped by lessons learned. I walked to the window, gazed out at the city lights, and understood that some tests you pass by simply refusing to play. Rewriting the lease felt like the final stroke in a long, silent battle. I sat at the kitchen table, the modified lease and Ruben's forms spread before me like blueprints for a new life. The ink of our former signatures stared back at me, reminders of the trust that had unraveled faster than I could have imagined. With deliberate care, I crossed out Celeste's name, careful not to cheat the lines of the printed page. Each strike carried weight, a declaration that this home would now rest solely on my shoulders, with no room for the betrayal she had orchestrated. Leah had told me to remain calm, that my emotional detachment would bolster my case if she chose to dispute the modification. I felt the truth of that advice in my fingertips as I signed my name beneath the revised clause, the pen's scratch echoing in the hush of the apartment. It was a small sound, but to me it resounded like victory. This document would bind me legally to a future untainted by her games. I gathered the paperwork into a neat stack and scanned each page with my phone, sending the digital copies to Leah for review. As I tapped send, a wave of relief washed over me. Every screenshot of her Instagram posts, every text she'd thrown at me in panic, it had all led to this moment of clarity and control. My next step was to submit the paperwork to Ruben, whose signature would finalize the lease modification. Later, Ruben arrived with his easy smile and towering presence. He moved through the apartment with professionalism and a hint of sympathy in his eyes. I handed him the forms. He reviewed them quickly, initialing each page. When he reached the page where Celeste's name had been carefully excised, he paused and locked eyes with me. "Everything's in order," he said quietly, placing the pen down. "I'll file this with the management office tomorrow. They'll update the official records." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. His validation felt like confirmation that I wasn't overreacting, that boundaries were worth enforcing. even in the face of personal upheaval. We shook hands, and he offered to mail me a copy of the updated lease once it was processed. As he packed his briefcase and headed for the door, I felt a new solidity in the air, as though the apartment itself recognized the shift. Left alone again, I walked through each room, noticing details I hadn't truly seen before. The play of light across the living room carpet, the smooth grain of the dining table where we'd shared countless meals, the view of the city skyline framed by the balcony door. These walls no longer carried echoes of passive-aggressive notes or whispers of half-forgotten arguments. They felt open, expectant, as if ready to witness the next chapter of my life. That evening, I watched Celeste's friends post sympathetic comments on her social media, but I didn't respond. I had muted her channels and removed her from my circles. I didn't need the commentary of outsiders to validate my choices. Instead, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat on the balcony, letting the amber warmth settle into my chest. Below, city lights flickered like distant stars, and I felt the enormity of what I'd done. Reclaimed my home, my peace, my right to live without the shadow of her manipulations. As the sky deepened into twilight, I reflected on the weeks that had led me here. What began as a suggestion of a week apart had become a test of my values and self-worth. She had tried to shake our marriage loose, but in the end, I rewrote the terms. I honored honesty, transparency, and boundaries, principles she had cast aside. The lease modification was more than a legal maneuver. It was a statement of my self-respect. Before bed, I walked through the apartment one last time, turning off lights as I went. In the bedroom, I paused at the closet door, where a single set of hangers held my clothes. The space beside them was empty, an open invitation for someone who might share this home with integrity in the future. I felt hope stir in my chest, a quiet assurance that I'd built a solid foundation on which to stand. As I slid into bed, I ran my fingers over the cold metal of the lock on the door, grateful for its unwavering guard. Tomorrow, the management office would record the change, and the world would know what I had already claimed: a home free of deceit, a life governed by my own principles, and a heart unburdened by games. With that thought, I closed my eyes and let sleep carry me into a future I had reclaimed, one boundary at a time. A week after the lease was officially mine, I found myself wandering the aisles of the downtown bookstore, searching for something to fill my evenings now that Celeste's books had been removed from our shared shelves. My fingers trailed over spines of fiction and philosophy alike, each title offering an escape from the real-life drama I'd endured. I felt lighter these days, as though I'd shed a layer of tension that had weighed on me for months. Yet I wasn't prepared for the next twist in the story. I rounded the corner to the biographies section and nearly crashed into a tall, awkward man clutching a worn paperback. He looked up, startled, his eyes widening as recognition crossed his face. I froze for a moment, puzzled by the familiarity of his features. Then I remembered the Instagram photo that had shattered everything. This was Kellen. He set his book down on a nearby display table and approached me with cautious steps, as if afraid his shadow might dissolve my newly established calm. I braced myself, heart tickling in my chest, uncertain of what he might say. "Hey," he said quietly, voice low enough not to draw attention from other patrons. He ran a hand through hair that fell in unruly waves at his collar. "Theo, right?" I nodded, folding my arms. The impulse to confront him with anger flared, but I tamped it down. I'd learned the power of measured responses. He swallowed and glanced around, as though worried someone might overhear. I saw what happened," he began, voice thick with regret. "The post on your Instagram feed. Celeste tagged me." The bile rose at the memory of her caption, how she'd framed it as universal wisdom, when in truth, it was a message of betrayal. I inclined my head, waiting. He took a shaky breath and continued. "She told me she and you were separated, that you agreed to it. She said your marriage was over." He looked at me, eyes earnest. "I didn't know. I swear. Theo, I had no idea this was supposed to be some experiment or test. If I'd known any of it, I never would have." His words trailed off on a sigh. I felt a strange mix of emotions: vindication, frustration, relief. 100 scenarios had played out in my mind, each one painting him as a deliberate intruder. But here he was, genuine and remorseful. I uncrossed my arms and let them drop to my sides. "Show me your phone," I said quietly. He hesitated only a moment before unlocking his device and handing it to me. My thumb hovered over the screen, and I scrolled through message after message, lighthearted flirting turning slow confessionals. They'd started weeks before Celeste's test, casual banter evolving into something more intimate. It was a soft launch of their affair, carefully orchestrated. He watched me, head bowed. She told me she was miserable, that you both needed space. She said you agreed to see other people. I believed her. I thought everything was done. I handed his phone back, seeing the weight in his shoulders. She lied, I said simply. She used my agreement as cover to set this up. I was never told the whole truth. He nodded, shame flickering across his face. I'm so sorry, man. I wish I'd known. I hate that I hurt you, even indirectly. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. In that moment, I realized how much power I'd regained over my own life. Celeste's manipulation had failed to break me. This encounter only underscored my resolve. Thank you for telling me, I said, surprising myself with the calmness of my tone. And for being honest now. He managed a small, grateful smile. I owe you that at least. I stepped back, feeling the tension drain from my limbs. The bookstore's muted lighting and the gentle murmur of other customers created a backdrop of serenity I couldn't remember feeling in our home before all this began. I'm going to the cashier, I said, gesturing toward the checkout stand where a stack of books waited. I'll see you around. He nodded, and I turned away, picking up the novels I'd selected earlier. I made my purchase in silence, the transaction smooth and unhurried. As I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, I felt the world open before me, a network of possibilities untainted by Celeste's games. For the first time since she walked out of my life, I felt free to chart my own course. I tucked the new books under my arm and began the walk home, each step lighter than the last. The encounter with Kellen had given me closure, confirmation of the deception, validation of my boundaries, and an unexpected ally in someone who genuinely regretted his part. By the time I reached my apartment door, the sky had shifted to dusk, the first stars winking into existence. I unlocked the door with ease, greeted by the familiar quiet and a space that was unquestionably mine. I placed my purchases on the coffee table and sank into the sofa, feeling a profound sense of relief wash over me. In that moment, I understood the truth of my journey. This wasn't about testing our love or proving loyalty. It was about uncovering the reality behind a facade and rewriting my own story. And as I settled back with the pages of my new book, I felt lighter, unburdened, and ready to embrace whatever came next on my own terms. I moved into my new apartment 3 months after modifying the lease. It was half the size of the old place, but the sunlight streaming through tall windows made it feel twice as large. The first morning I woke there, I stepped onto hardwood floors still echoing with that satisfying creak, and felt a thrill of freedom I hadn't known in years. No more duffel bags lined the hallway. No locks betrayed the tension we once shared. Instead, I breathed in the quiet promise of possibility and realized that I was finally untethered. My routine settled quickly into peaceful patterns. I woke at dawn, brewed coffee in my French press, and watched dust motes dance in the beam of early light. I noted how satisfying it felt to move through my own space, unafraid of triggering silent betrayals or misread signals. With each sip of coffee, I affirmed my decision to draw boundaries rather than plead for understanding. I treasured the way morning rituals became rituals of self-care instead of silent wars of omission. Work reclaimed its rightful place in my life, no longer interrupted by frantic texts or last-minute visits from a wife testing my loyalty. I arrived at the office feeling calm and prepared. My productivity soared as deadlines and presentations once again became my only focus. I found clarity in spreadsheets and creativity in client meetings, discovering that professional achievements could be gratifying without the undercurrent of relational drama. My colleagues noticed the change. I was sharper, more engaged, and noticeably at peace. At lunchtime, I often walked to the park across the street, relishing the independence of filling my own hours. I listened to birds sing through budding branches, felt the warmth of the sun on my skin, and allowed my mind to wander without dragging around the weight of a troubled marriage. I bought sandwiches from my favorite deli, free to choose exactly what I wanted without debating preferences or enduring sidewise glances. I learned to savor solitude as a luxury rather than a punishment. Evenings were mine to fill with new experiences rather than old resentments. I signed up for a Sunday cooking class, laughing and chatting with strangers as we diced onions and learned to make handmade pasta. I joined a book club at the local library, where I discovered stories that expanded my empathy and reopened my curiosity. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, inviting them to dine on my tiny table beneath a string of cafe lights I installed over the balcony. Each new connection grounded me further in authenticity. Weekends brought spontaneous road trips along the coast, windows down and music up, the salt breeze stinging my face as I navigated winding roads. I stopped at roadside citrus stands, sampling kumquats and fresh-squeezed lemonade, feeling the thrill of adventure without guilt or second-guessing. I camped under the stars, sleeping in a tent that belonged only to me, waking to the soft cries of gulls and the gentle crash of waves miles away. Those trips reminded me that freedom was not just a concept but a lived reality. I thought of Celeste occasionally. Memories surfaced in patches, her laugh at a shared joke, the way she curled into my shoulder on quiet mornings, the comforting scent of her perfume lingering in the air. But those traces dissolved under a new light. The same light that illuminated the foundation she had cracked. I realized that my nostalgia was tempered by the knowledge that her test was never about us. It was about her attempt to reclaim power by breaking what she feared she couldn't control. I refused to participate. News of our breakup reached friends through various channels, social media posts that cast me as the villain or rumors of my callousness. She spun tales of my emotional unavailability while I offered no rebuttal. Instead, I trusted those who truly knew me to see beyond the headlines. I let my absence of drama become its own statement. If silence could speak, I would choose that speech over any protestations. One afternoon, I ran into Kellen, the man from her Instagram post, at a charity fundraiser. We exchanged a polite nod and then spoke candidly about what had happened. He apologized again, genuinely contrite, and I accepted his apology with ease. The finality of that conversation surprised me. I felt no residual anger, only relief that the narrative had been clarified. He and I parted as acquaintances rather than adversaries, both of us freed from her manipulations. Life continued to change in small, meaningful ways. I began volunteering at a local shelter once a month, helping sort donations and chatting with volunteers who shared my ideals. Their dedication inspired me, reinforcing my belief that integrity and compassion could coexist. I discovered purpose beyond personal upheaval, channeling energy into projects that mattered. My weekends filled not with anxiety over text messages but with fulfilling acts of service. At night, I often sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching city lights reflect off distant windows. I imagined lives unfolding in each illuminated room, each person carrying their own burdens and triumphs. My burdens felt lighter now. My triumphs, steady boundaries, genuine connections, felt sweeter. I reflected on the power of choices made in moments of vulnerability and realized that the most significant test I had passed was the test of self-respect. Some tests push you to fight, others to plead for forgiveness. But some tests, I learned, you pass simply by leaving. Not by hurling accusations or staging pity parties, but by walking away from anything that demanded your compromise. In that departure, you claim the right to your own worth and invite new chapters untainted by past deceit. My apartment stood as a testament to that lesson. No ghosts in the corners, no relics of broken promises, only shelves holding books I loved, walls alive with art I chose, and windows framing a world full of possibilities. Every morning I reminded myself of the freedom I earned. Every evening I savored the peace I preserved. One night, long after the door to the old apartment was forgotten, I deleted the address from my navigation app. I eroded every breadcrumb leading back to that chapter, not out of spite but out of respect for the new life I had built. I slept soundly without worry of midnight knocks or desperate voicemail. There, in the silence of my own home, I understood the essence of every test we face in relationships. They reveal what we value and how far we'll go to preserve it. Some test you pass by proving loyalty, some by forging compromise. And some, most emphatically, by recognizing those tests for what they really are and simply walking away. In that departure, you don't lose love, you gain yourself. And that, I discovered, is the most profound victory of all.